let's talk about kids returning to school full time. Scotland, that's already been happening, of course. Now we've been seeing pictures of them going back as of this week, wearing those face masks in communal areas. That's not the case in the schools returning in England. That's only if you end up in a sort of a lockdown, high COVID area. 4 out of 10 schools in England returning today, full time. The rest of them returning in the next few days. Let's talk to Jerry Glazier, executive member of the National Education Union. He's also a teacher himself. Good morning to you, Jerry.
Good morning, Julia.
Finally, this day, I mean, a lot of my listeners have been getting in touch saying, God, I want schools to go back, just so you all stop talking about schools going back. I'm hoping that within about a week or two, we won't even be mentioning this. This will just be a done deal. It will have gone back and everything will be fine. But your union, the member of which you're an executive member, has been one of the ones that's been seen to be dragging its feet. Are your members now all happy to be back in the classroom?
Julia, I must start by challenging you. We haven't been dragging our
Haven't
feet.
you?
We were concerned about health and safety for kids and for parents and for staff, but we have supported for many weeks now, and we've talked about this, schools going back from this week, and we think it's absolutely the right thing to do. Schools have had a lot of time to prepare their COVID secure measures, so we're confident about that. And we are also very concerned about the fact that kids do need to be back at school, that many kids lost out by not being in school, particularly the most disadvantaged kids. And the learning loss issue is a concern to us as well.
Okay, can I just point out that you're from a teaching union. Teaching union is responsible for teachers. You've got no input on whether or not my child or I am safe about my child going back to school. It's none of your darn business.
Well, I think it's our darn business, Julia.
It's not your business. You're a union. You represent teachers. It's got nothing to do with you.
We've had this discussion before, Julia, but it's about how the safety of a school environment is and how it affects, because there's two components to the school, Julia, as you know full well. There's the kids and there's the adults. Yeah. And obviously we're very concerned about the safety of kids, but we're very concerned about the safety of adults in school, of the educators in school, the education staff.
You're entitled to that's your job as a union.
They're linked.
Okay, well, yeah. Whether or not kids go back or not, for me, kids' safety is a different concern. That's one for the head teachers, the government, and indeed for me as a parent about my child. Let's talk about those most disadvantaged children. The head of the front page show of The Guardian has got a new survey carried out by the National Foundation for Educational Research. They've interviewed more than 3,000 teachers and heads at about 2,000 schools, and they say that they believe the gap between rich and poor pupils has widened 46% in a year. It's the most disadvantaged pupils in the poorest areas who have lost out most. Whose fault is that?
Well, we think there's a number of issues here. It was beginning to happen before the COVID crisis, Julia, to be honest, and that was to do with increasing levels of poverty in society. But obviously, the fact that millions of kids have not been regularly in school since the 20th of March has had an impact, and that's impacted disproportionately on those kids from less advantageous backgrounds. And we've discussed the issue about access to the internet, having computer equipment. As many as 700,000 kids didn't have the appropriate access, which obviously disadvantaged them. So we are concerned about having an education system which meets the needs of all kids, but particularly helps and supports those kids who find access to education more challenging. So there's a big challenge ahead for schools. There's a big challenge ahead for government to put this right as a matter of urgency.
Well, I mean, you said that poverty was increasing before COVID. It's an issue with virtually full employment. I find that quite hard to believe. But this is the thing. We know it's children who went to schools where they were not given lessons online, whether Zoom lessons or recorded lessons, but didn't have much interaction. And we know a lot of those schools are in some of the most disadvantaged areas. But there are also a lot of schools where they've got, loads of kids on free school meals, very disadvantaged children, and they were able to provide those online lessons. See, we're able to get those that tech stuff, equipment out to pupils. Why do some schools manage to do it and some schools don't?
Well, I don't know the extent of that, Julie, but what I do know is the government promised 200,000 units for kids.
So these are laptops and iPads, and they just simply didn't appear, did they? I think they didn't appear until August, which is a bit too late.
Well, yes, maybe, but some didn't appear till way into June, and that was too much too late. I agree with you entirely, and that was only a proportion of the kids who needed them. So that's a serious factor. But I think schools did what they could do, and some schools were able to do different things. I mean, there are schools that were conscious about the digital divide and actually ensured that all students had physical copies of activities to do. Many schools regularly made contact with their kids to make sure that they were of their welfare during the whole of that pandemic, and I think that's got to be properly
No, they
recognised.
did, and I've got family members and friends who were teachers, and they said a lot of their time was spent checking that kids were okay. They were always performing a social services role. However, they weren't doing a teaching role. I've got lots of friends who've got kids in areas, in leafy suburbs, and they weren't given any lessons, despite the fact that virtually every kid there has got a laptop. And even frankly, if 3 kids or even 10 kids out of 30 in a class don't have a laptop, that's still not an excuse not to educate the kids who do have access to online learning. Why do you think some schools were able to do it and some schools weren't?
I have no idea, to be honest with you, Julia. I haven't got that granular knowledge, but from my understanding of the situation, for the schools I had contact with, I know that teachers were doing their utmost to
Not
provide
everyone was,
education.
were they? I mean,
My
by
experience
definition, they weren't all doing well because loads of kids, millions of kids didn't have lessons. So if that's teachers doing their best, then it's a pretty low bar.
Well, I think you just have to take my word for it. From my perspective, you may well be right, Julie. There may be some instances where that's the case, but I think
4 million children didn't get lessons to all intents and purposes. That's a pretty low bar of teachers doing their best. If that was for most people listening, and me and my team, if that was our best, frankly, we'd all be out in our ear.
Well, I don't know where you got that statistic from. It's new to me, Julia. But look,
sorry.
The future.
2 million children had no lessons at all, and 2.3 million children only had a maximum of like an hour and a couple of hours a week. Those statistics, those have been gathered. Those statistics have been out from the Department for Education and accepted by the Department for Education and the Education Select Committee. We've been discussing those for a couple of months. How do you not know those statistics?
Well,
we were just pretending all the kids were having a great time.
I've not said that, Julia. You're a bit argumentative this morning for the sake of having an argument. I'm trying my best to explain to you.
No, I'm not. I'm not argumentative for the sake of having an argument. But I find the attitude, particularly from your union, this idea that teachers were doing a wonderful thing, but isn't it terrible that disadvantaged children didn't get lessons? There is a link between what teachers did and the amount of lessons that poor children got. And I have a funny feeling that the teaching unions may have played a role in that. Do you not think there's any link between those things?
I don't think the teacher unions played any role in doing other than encouraging members to do what they could do to give educational opportunities to children during the lockdown. That's what teachers would do. And why would they not do anything else? That's perverse in thinking that would be the case. Teachers are in teaching because they care about children, they care about education. They don't do it for any other substantial reason. They certainly don't do it for the rewards, Julia, as you know.
Okay, right. Let's talk about what happens next, though, in terms of exams and the like. Some the Labour Party's been calling for schools to actually delay having those exams, the government to delay. It looks like Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, is going to agree to that. When do you think the exams should be, GCSEs and A-levels next year, to make up the time that all of those lessons that have been lost?
Well, I think it makes sense to put some delay in the examinations to enable some catch-up to take place. But I think schools and exam boards and school leaders need to evaluate exactly what's going to be possible in terms of the examination system, what is going to be possible in terms of catching up. And I do think we need to have in place a much more robust process, should things go pear-shaped, we hope they don't, in terms of enabling teacher assessment and the progress of the students throughout the 2 years of the course to count towards the outcome. One of the dangers of the current examination system is that it's a completely dependent now on the final exam, which we don't think is absolutely the best way to do it. We think teacher assessment throughout the course of the 2 years, properly moderated, would be a fairer determination of the efforts and outcomes and achievements of the students. So we would like to have a more fundamental look at the examination system. But on what's being announced possibly today, then we welcome that. But we need to be quite realistic about what is achievable in terms of the curriculum, so the examination system reflects what the kids have actually been able to be taught.